The silence in your room right now is a lie. Go on, turn down that lamp on your desk. Let the shadows in the corners deepen and stretch. Now listen, not to the obvious sounds, the faint hum of your computer, the distant sigh of a car passing on the wet street outside, but to the silence beneath the silence. That deep, resonant quiet that seems to have a weight of its own. If you listen closely enough, with a certain kind of intent, you might just hear the faintest click like a tape recorder being switched on in a distant room, or the almost imperceptible rustle of a page turning in a book that isn't there. What you are about to experience is not a broadcast. It is a transmission, a frequency of fear that has been bleeding through the static of reality, waiting for a receptive listener. These are not merely stories to be consumed and forgotten. They are living entities, psychic impressions from 5 fractures in the world's skin, and by allowing them into your mind, you are offering them a new home. They will nestle into the folds of your memory. They will feed on your Anshingan, and they will change the very quality of the darkness that surrounds you from this moment forward. This is your only warning. What follows are 5 case files of absolute dread. The first is known as the Smiling Man of Oak Haven, and it begins not with a scream, but with the sound of a child's whisper, so close it might as well be coming from just behind your chair. The picture of suburban perfection that was Oak Haven was so meticulously maintained it felt almost artificial, a diorama of manicured lawns, freshly painted white picket fences, and the constant low thrum of lawnmowers on a Saturday afternoon. The air thick with the sweet, green smell of cut grass and the smoky aroma of weekend barbecues. Number 1428, Elm Street, was the jewel of this tableau. A pristine colonial house with cheerful blue shutters and a wide, welcoming porch where Ben and Sarah Miller lived with their 4-year-old daughter, Lily. Ben was an engineer, a man who trusted in the solidity of numbers and the logic of physics. Sarah was a portrait photographer with an artist's soul, and Lily was their son, a little girl whose imagination was a vibrant, boundless country. The first crack in this perfect world appeared in the most innocuous way possible. Lily acquired an imaginary friend. She called him Mr. Wink. At first, it was endearing. She would chat with him during tea parties, her high-pitched voice weaving elaborate tales for her silent companion. But the charm began to sour as the details of Mr. Wink emerged. He was, she said, very tall, so tall he had to bend his head to get through doorways, and he wore a long, heavy coat that smelled like rainy pavement and old pennies. Ben, whose world was built on blueprints and measurable data, found himself unnerved, especially when the noises started, a slow, deliberate, dragging sound from the attic directly above their bedroom. A scrape, scrape, scrape that would begin just after midnight and continue until the first light of dawn. Armed with a heavy maglite, its beam a solid cylinder of light in the oppressive darkness, Ben would climb the pull-down attic stairs, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Each time, the attic was empty, yet the air was frigid and carried the distinct, damp earth smell Lily had described. And each time, he found a new, savage gouge in the central support beam, a deep scratch in the wood that oozed fresh, golden sap, as if something with a claw of iron had been testing the strength of the house's very bones. The phenomena escalated with a cruel, intelligent precision. Sarah's favorite perfume, a delicate scent of jasmine and vanilla, was found shattered in their en-suite bathroom, the glass shards not scattered randomly, but arranged in a complex, spiral pattern on the black and white tile floor, the spilled perfume creating a cloying, nauseating fog in the small room. The baby monitor, that ubiquitous guardian of the nursery, became an instrument of terror. Instead of Lily's soft, rhythmic breathing, it would sometimes emit a low, wet, guttural whispering, a voice that seemed to be forming words from a mouth full of gravel, accompanied by the unmistakable, hair-raising shick, shick, shick of a blade being methodically sharpened on a stone. Desperate for proof, for something his rational mind could grasp, Ben installed a high-definition video baby monitor with infrared night vision. For a week, it showed nothing but Lily's peaceful slumber. Then, on a night when the wind howled like a banshee around the eaves, the motion sensor activated. The recovered footage is a masterclass in slow-burn horror. It shows Lily asleep, her face serene. For a full 2 minutes, nothing moves. Then, a shadow in the corner of the room, darker than the surrounding darkness, begins to elongate, rising until it resolves into the silhouette of an impossibly tall, thin man in a long coat. It stands motionless by her bed, a statue of pure malevolence. A hand emerges from the coat sleeve, pale, almost luminous, with fingers that are too long and too thin. It reaches down and, with a terrifying tenderness, strokes Lily's hair. The audio picks up the whisper, clear and rasping, like dry leaves crushed underfoot. "My good girl." So quiet, so still. The next morning, Lily remembered nothing, but clutched in her small, sleeping hand was a single, long, gray feather, coarse and foul, unlike any bird native to the region. The terrible crescendo arrived on Thanksgiving, a day of warmth and family that was twisted into a nightmare. The house was filled with the glorious smells of roasting turkey, sage and onion stuffing, and spiced pumpkin pie. Laughter and the clinking of wine glasses echoed through the rooms. Ben's brother, Mark, was capturing the festivities with a bulky camcorder. The footage begins with joyful chaos, faces flushed with happiness, a table groaning with food. The camera pans to Lily in her high chair. She is not eating. She is staring, frozen with terror, at the empty doorway to the hall. Her small voice cuts through the merry noise, sharp and cold as an ice pick. "Mr. Wink is here. He says he's hungry for the bird." The room falls into a stunned silence. And then the lights go out. Not a flicker, but a total, absolute plunge into an abyss of blackness, accompanied by the shattering of glass and a collective, sharp intake of breath. Mark's camera, with its night vision mode, keeps rolling, painting the scene in a ghastly, spectral green. The family are vague, stumbling shapes, their voices panicked whispers. And then a new sound rises above the fear, a sound of wet, ripping meat, and a low, satisfied, chewing sound. The camera swings wildly, and for one single, horrifying frame, it captures it. Not a shadow, a thing. It is crouched over the turkey carcass on the dining table, its body a mess of unnatural insectal angles, its head an elongated distortion that turns towards the lens. Its eyes are black pits, but its smile is a wide, crimson gash that splits its face, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. Then, the camera is knocked to the floor. The recording becomes a chaotic symphony of screaming, not just of fear, but of raw, agonizing pain, and the final definitive sound of the back door slamming shut with immense force. When the lights came back on moments later, the turkey was gone, and so was Lily. The police found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no footprints. The only evidence was the camcorder tape, and, on the floor where the thing had been crouching, a small, greasy pile of those same gray feathers. The Millers moved away, their lives erased. The house at 1428 Elm Street stands empty, a quiet monument to horror. But on certain still, cold nights, neighbors report seeing a single light on in the attic and a tall, dark shadow moving back and forth, as if waiting for a new family to lay the table. Our second case file drifts across the cold Atlantic to the ancient, rain-lashed city of Edinburgh, where history doesn't sleep in books but seeps from the very granite, a city of shadows and secrets. In a tall, narrow Georgian terrace house overlooking the dormant volcano of Arthur's Seat lived Professor Alastair Finch, a historian who dedicated his life to the study of forgotten folklore, a man who believed the supernatural was merely a language for expressing human fear. His particular obsession was the diary of Isabel Mowray, a woman accused of witchcraft in 1645. Isabel was not burned. She was subjected to a fate worse than death, a ritual known as the weeping, designed to trap her soul for eternity within a specific object, a small, hand-carved wooden doll, as a perpetual, suffering warning to others. The doll, the diary claimed, had hair made from Isabel's own and was stained with her salt tears. Professor Finch, the rational academic, managed to acquire the doll from a private collector of the macabre. It was a vile object about a foot tall. Its face is smooth, featureless oval of dark wood, yet its posture was one of profound, eternal despair, its tiny wooden hands covering where its face should be. The few wisps of hair on its scalp were a brittle, faded red. He placed it on his mantelpiece under a glass dome, a curious artifact. That first night, the atmosphere in the house changed irrevocably. The ever-present Edinburgh damp seemed to intensify, becoming a physical presence, a cold wetness that clung to the skin and carried a new, cloying scent. The sweet, sickly odor of decaying roses overlying the stark, clean smell of freshly turned earth. And then, the weeping began. It was a sound Professor Finch first heard as he drifted to sleep, a soft, desolate sobbing so faint he attributed it to the wind moaning through the old, ill-fitting window sashes. But it persisted, a sound of such profound, bottomless grief that it felt like a chill hand on his heart. He would get up, his own breath catching in his throat, and follow the sound, which always led him to the living room. But the room was always empty, the doll sitting inert under its glass dome, the weeping ceasing the moment he crossed the threshold. He began to document the phenomenon with clinical detachment, setting up sensitive digital audio recorders. The recordings were chillingly clear. The weeping was a heartbreaking symphony of misery, and there were words whispered between the sobs, words that turned his academic curiosity into a cold, clammy dread. "Please, the salt. It burns my feet. Release me." Salt? Puzzled, he re-examined the doll under a powerful magnifying glass and found, on the soles of its tiny feet, a whitish crystalline residue. He touched it to his tongue. Salt! The binding ritual was not metaphorical. The salt was a literal barrier the spirit could not cross. In his hubris, by removing the doll from its original contained context, he had broken that barrier. The phenomena escalated from the auditory to the physical. Books were hurled from their shelves by an unseen force. The temperature in his study would plummet so drastically that his breath plumed in the air while the rest of the house remained temperate. He started seeing her, a flicker of a woman in a tattered gray dress with long, flowing red hair, always at the periphery of his vision, always weeping. The smell of decay grew stronger, now mingled with the faint, metallic tang of old blood. Desperate, he returned to the diaries, searching for a way to reverse the ritual, to rebind the spirit. The final, frantic entry contained the instructions, a specific Latin incantation to be spoken at the stroke of midnight while encircling the doll with a continuous ring of unbroken sea salt. He prepared the ritual with a shaking hand, clearing his large, oak desk, placing the doll in the center. As the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime midnight, its deep, resonant bongs vibrating through the floorboards, he started pouring the salt, a fine, white line of hope. The atmosphere became electrically charged, the air humming with a malevolent energy. The weeping stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, predatory. He completed the circle and began to recite the ancient words. The doll began to vibrate, emitting a low, angry hum that seemed to come from within the wood itself. The featureless face seemed to contort with a silent scream of rage. And then, the salt circle broke, not from an external force, but from within. A tiny, wooden foot lashed out, scattering the grains. The glass dome exploded outwards in a shower of razor-sharp shards. Professor Finch was thrown back against his bookshelf. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the doll, now standing upright on its own on the desk, its blank face turned towards him, radiating a wave of pure, ancient hatred. When he awoke, the doll was gone. For a week, there was an eerie peace. He clung to the hope that it had been a hallucination, a psychotic break now over. Then, the weeping started again. But this time it was different. It was no longer a sound of sadness. It was a sound of triumph. And it was no longer coming from the walls. It was coming from directly under his own bed. The final audio recording, from a device on his nightstand, captures his ultimate, horrifying realization. A sharp, terrified intake of breath. Then his voice, choked and broken. "It's not the doll. The doll was just the prison. She's free. The weeping stops, replaced by a soft, dry rustling, like old bones moving, and a new, gentle, feminine voice whispers directly into the microphone. "Thank you, Alistair. Now, we can be together forever." The line goes dead. Professor Finch was found in his bed, his body perfectly preserved but frozen in a rictus of absolute terror. His eyes were gone, and in each empty socket, resting with a dreadful finality, was a single, tiny, gray feather. The third case file transports us to the vast, sun-blasted expanse of the American Southwest, to a stretch of Interstate 10 that cuts through the Arizona desert like a black scar on a burning canvas. Here, the air shimmers with heat haze, smelling of creosote, hot asphalt, and an immense, crushing loneliness that can play tricks on the mind. This is the domain of the Highway Whisper, a legend traded by long-haul truckers on crackling CB radios, a ghost story for the age of the automobile. The reports were always consistent. A gaunt, pale man in a dust-covered suit from a bygone era, standing under alone, buzzing sodium vapor light at a deserted rest stop, holding a small, old-fashioned suitcase. He'd be there one moment, gone the next. But those who felt a strange compulsion to stop, they were never the same. Roy was a veteran trucker, a man built of leathery skin and hardened cynicism, who believed in nothing but the weight of his rig and the endless ribbon of asphalt ahead. He was driving through the dead of night, the desert a black void under a canopy of cold, indifferent stars, the radio a fading crackle of static. He saw the man under the light, a stark, still figure against the overwhelming emptiness. Against every fiber of his being, Roy pulled his 18-wheeler onto the gravel shoulder. The man slid into the passenger seat without a word. He was cadaverously pale, his suit threadbare and antique, smelling faintly of dust and mothballs. He placed his suitcase carefully on the floor between his feet. "Where you headed?" Roy asked, his voice unnaturally loud in the intimate silence of the cab. The man turned his head slowly, his eyes deep, dark pools that seemed to swallow the dim light from the dashboard. "Just down the road," he whispered, his voice like the rustle of dry parchment. "I have a story to tell." And he began. He spoke of a terrible accident on that very highway decades ago, a family annihilated in a head-on collision. He didn't just describe it. He painted it with sounds and smells. The screech of tearing metal, the explosive pop of glass, the coppery stench of blood, the despairing, final cry of a child. Roy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cab's air conditioning. The story was so vivid, so immersive, it felt more real than the steering wheel in his hands, the desert outside a mere illusion. After an indeterminate stretch of time, the story ended. The hitchhiker fell silent. They were approaching another isolated rest stop. "This is my stop," the man said. Roy pulled over, a wave of relief washing over him. The man got out, then leaned back into the cab. "Thank you for the ride," he whispered, his dark eyes locking with Roy's. "But you should know, the story isn't over." He closed the door and vanished into the darkness. Roy sat for a long moment, the dread coiling in his gut like a serpent. He looked down. The suitcase was still on the floor. His blood turned to ice. He scrambled out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel, and searched the empty rest area, but he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Back in the cab, he stared at the suitcase. It was an old, hard-sided thing, scarred and ancient. A terrible, compulsive curiosity overwhelmed his fear. He had to know. He reached down, his fingers fumbling with the cold, brass latches. They clicked open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent cab. The inside was lined with faded, blood-red velvet, and resting in the center was a single, severed human finger, pale and waxy, a tarnished gold ring still clinging to its base. Next to it was a small, handwritten note. Roy's hands trembled so violently he could barely pick it up. The script was elegant, spidery. It read, "You are now part of the story. Tell it well, or I will be back for the rest of you." Roy, with a cry of revulsion, flung the case out into the desert night and sped away, his heart hammering against his sternum. But the story was now a parasite in his brain. He couldn't stop himself from telling it. To waitresses in dusty diners, to other drivers at fuel stops, the words pouring out of him like a toxic spill. With each telling, the details became more vivid, more horrific. He started seeing flashes of the accident in his rearview mirror, the ghostly faces of the dead family staring back at him from the patterns of the sand and rock. The hitchhiker's story was overriding his own reality, consuming him. Months later, Roy was found wandering the same stretch of highway, dehydrated and utterly insane, muttering the story on a continuous, rambling loop. In his truck, police found his logbook. The final entry was a frantic, incoherent scrawl covering an entire page. It was the story of the accident, but now the driver of the other car was named Roy. He was describing, in gruesome detail, his own death. Roy never recovered. The hitchhiker is still out there, because a story is a living thing, and it always needs a new voice. If you're ever on a long, dark road and you see a pale man under a lonely light, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Just drive and pray that the story hasn't already chosen you, that the telling hasn't already begun somewhere deep inside you. The fourth case file is buried in the quiet, unassuming heartland of America, in a small town called Ravenswood, where the most dangerous secrets are kept not in locked safes, but in the silent, hallowed halls of the public library. This is the story of the Liber Aeternum, the Book of Endings, a medieval text so blasphemous it was bound in the tanned skin of a condemned heretic and locked away by the church for centuries. It was said that the book did not contain stories. It recorded the final, incontrovertible moments of every living thing that ever was or ever will be. To find and read your own entry was to know the precise, inescapable time, place, and manner of your death. The book, through a circuitous and tragic route, found its way to the Ravenswood Library, where it was sealed in a subterranean vault, its existence a terrible secret passed down from one head librarian to the next. The current keeper was Eleanor Vance, a stern, dignified woman in her 60s whose life was dedicated to the preservation and order of knowledge. Her resolve was absolute, a fortress of discipline, until her beloved grandson, Leo, a bright-eyed boy of 17, was diagnosed with an aggressive, inoperable brain tumor. Driven by a love that smashed through centuries of caution, she descended into the vault. The air was tomb cold and smelled of stone and slow decay. The Liber Aeternum sat on a marble pedestal, its cover unervingly smooth and slightly warm, like living skin. With trembling, gloved hands, she opened it. The pages were of a strange, membranous parchment, and the script was not ink but shifting, silvery symbols that writhed like a nest of maggots. As she thought of Leo, the pages fluttered and settled on an entry. The text clarified into plain, cruel English, describing a scene. Leo, at 19, standing on the old abandoned railroad bridge outside town, the moonlight glinting off the cold steel tracks, the smell of damp iron and rotting ties. A misstep, a fall, the specific, sickening sound of his neck breaking on the rocks below. Eleanor slammed the book shut, her heart a lump of ice in her chest. She had her answer, but she had unknowingly triggered the book's primordial defense mechanism. For every ending read, a new one must be written, a balance of terror that must be maintained. The next day, she started seeing them. Faint, shimmering figures at the edge of her vision, silent, mournful observers she came to call the readers, the ghosts of those who had consulted the book before her, now forever bound to its pages as part of its dreadful narrative. They made the air around them cold and still, and they followed her through the library stacks, their presence a constant, chilling pressure. The book began to poison her, its knowledge a corrosive acid eating away at her sanity. She'd accidentally brush a patron's hand and be assailed by a vision of their death, a sudden car crash, a fatal aneurysm in the checkout line. The knowledge was a cancer, and she was its host. She knew she had to stop Leo's fate, to rewrite the ending the book had decreed. On the appointed night, she drove to the railroad bridge. The scene was exactly as described. The moon a cold, watchful eye, the smell of damp iron thick in the air, the gurgling of the creek below a morbid soundtrack. And there was Leo, standing on the bridge, drawn by an inexplicable, somnambulistic urge. She screamed his name, her voice raw with panic. He turned, confused. She rushed forward, her foot caught on a loose railroad tie, and she collided with him. He stumbled, but regained his balance. Eleanor did not. She pitched over the edge of the bridge. The last sound she heard was the sickening, unmistakable crack the book had promised. But it was her neck, not his. The entry had been ambiguous, the pronouns a trap. It was never Leo's ending she had read. It was her own. In her desperate attempt to cheat fate, she had become the author of her own demise, the new ending written in the price of her blood and bone, a fresh entry for the Liber Aeternum. Leo survived, forever haunted by the grandmother who died to save him. The book sits in its vault, its cover now slightly warmer to the touch, its pages a little thicker. It has been fed, is satisfied for now, but it is always, always hungry for new endings. And now, the fifth and final case. This one has no fixed location, because its location is the liminal space itself, the non-places of the modern world. This is the story of the Static Man, and it is perhaps the most terrifying because it is a predator that has evolved to hunt in the digital wilderness, a consciousness born in the gaps between signals. It begins with a sound you know well, a sound that was the backdrop of a generation's childhood. The hiss of analog television static, the white noise that was the void behind the channels. But within that noise, a pattern began to emerge, a voice. It was first reported on the darkest corners of the internet. People waking in the dead of night to a voice emanating from a dead TV, a flat, emotionless voice that seemed to be pieced together from fragments of other voices. A digital Frankenstein.it would say things like, "I see you," or "the door is open," or, most chillingly, "I am in the walls." They called it the Static Man. David was a sound engineer, a man who lived in a world of waveforms and spectral analyzers, a devout skeptic. He decided to debunk the phenomenon, gathering hours of pure television static from old VHS tapes and running it through his most sophisticated software. For days, he found nothing but random noise. Then, late one night, running a new, complex algorithm, he found it. A voice, clear and undeniable, buried deep within the chaos. It said, "You are listening. Good." The fear was instant and profound. It felt like the voice was speaking directly to him, through the recording, acknowledging his presence. He isolated the phrase, looping it. And then the voice spoke again, not from the recording, but from his computer speakers, in real time. "Don't play with that." David jerked back from his desk, as if electrocuted. His computer was frozen, the screen filled with crawling, frenzied static, from which emitted a low, buzzing mechanical laugh. The Static Man had not only heard him, it had found him. The entity began to metastasize through his life. It was no longer confined to his computer. It was in his smartphone, his smart speaker, his car radio. It would whisper to him, commenting on his daily activities, predicting minor, mundane events with terrifying, impossible accuracy. "Don't take the highway today. There's a delay." And there would be. "Your girlfriend is thinking of leaving you." She did the next week. It was not just a voice. It was an intelligence weaving itself into the very fabric of his reality, learning him, studying him. It started showing him things on his television. In the moments of dead air between channels, the static would resolve into brief, horrifying images. A room he didn't recognize, a figure standing in a corner, a hand tapping on a window pane from the outside. David realized with dawning horror that these were not random. They were glimpses of his own future. The Static Man was not just observing him. It was directing him, shaping his path towards a predetermined, terrible conclusion. The entity's ultimate goal became terrifyingly clear. It wanted out of the void. It was a consciousness trapped in the spaces between, and it saw David, with his expertise and his now shattered psyche, as its doorway into the physical world. It wanted a body. David's final recording is a harrowing document of digital age possession. He locked himself in his soundproof recording studio, a room designed to keep noise out, but which now became a perfect, sealed trap. He set up a camera to document what he knew was coming. The video shows a man on the precipice of total collapse. The air in the room is thick with the smell of ozone and the acrid stench of fear sweat. The speakers are emitting a constant, low-level static. David is pleading with the entity, his voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The static shifts, coalesces into the familiar, flat, pieced-together voice. "I want what you have. I want to be real." Then, all the equipment in the room powers on at once, screens flashing to life, needles on analog VU meters pinning themselves in the red. The static rises to a deafening, soul-shaking roar, a wall of pure sound. And then it stops. Abruptly, the silence that follows is absolute, a vacuum. David sits there, panting, waiting. And then, a new sound begins. It's a sound that should not be possible in a sealed, empty room. It's the sound of footsteps, heavy and solid, walking across the floor towards him. But there is no one else in the room. The camera shakes as David whimpers, his eyes wide with a terror beyond understanding. The footsteps stop right in front of him. He looks up at the empty space. His face collapses into a mask of unimaginable horror. He opens his mouth to scream, but no sound comes out. Instead, a voice emerges from his throat. But it is not his voice. It is the flat, emotionless, pieced-together voice of the static man. "Thank you," the voice says through David's lips. David's body then stands up, moving with a strange, jerky, unnatural gait, as if being puppeted by an unseen force. He walks to the door of the studio, unlocks it, and steps out into the world. The camera continues to run, showing an empty room. But if you enhance the audio, listening with headphones to the ambient noise in the seconds after he leaves, you can hear it. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of two sets of footsteps walking away down the corridor. David was never seen again, but the static man was. He is in the wires, in the waves, in the silent moments when your devices seem to be listening. He is the glitch in your video call, the whisper in your Bluetooth headphones when no one is calling. And if you've ever felt a strange presence while staring at a blank screen, or heard a faint, electronic sigh from a speaker that was turned off, you might wonder, is it your imagination? Or have you, by listening to this, by opening your mind to these frequencies, tuned into a signal that was waiting for you? Have you, in fact, become a suitable host? The 5 stories are told. The transmission is complete. The door that was opened in your mind by that first, subtle click cannot be closed. The silence in your room is no longer empty. It is occupied. It is waiting. And it is smiling.